Hello and welcome to this session on using Irish landed estate papers to find your ancestors. My name is Gillian Hunt and I'm the Research Officer with the Ulster Historical Foundation. We are a not-for-profit educational charity which has been helping people find out more about their Irish and Scots-Irish ancestors since 1956. In this session we're going to be looking at landed estate papers and the information they can contain on our ancestors. Ireland was a country made up of landed estates, and the majority of our ancestors were tenants renting a house or a farm from these landlords. Now, estates varied in size. Some were quite small, with only a few tenants. Others were vast, estates covering more than one county in Ireland, with the house, the stately home, being at the heart of the estate, very much like the TV show Downton Abbey. These were run as businesses, and much like businesses, they generated an awful lot of paperwork. And the larger estates, many of which their estate paper collections have been deposited in the public archives, and it's those records that we're going to look at in this session. Landed estate papers are a very important but underused resource for Irish family history research, particularly if either you've already explored all the church records for the area your family lived in, or perhaps the church records haven't survived as far back as you would like. Now, there are various categories of estate papers, and not all collections will have all of these, it just varies as to how they were managed. We are going to look at the most common types of record in this session: rentals, rent rolls, leases, lease books and maps. Most of our ancestors are tenants on an estate, but you may find that your ancestors were landowners, and in that case there are other kinds of documents within estate collections such as wills, deeds and marriage settlements that I'm not covering in this talk. Now, rentals can be the most among the earliest kind of records we find in estate collections, and they can help identify how long your ancestral family lived in a particular area. Some of them are quite basic, as we see in this example from 1718, the Vintners Company estate record. Some other rentals may contain additional information, detailing information from the lease, for example, but it does vary. Now, estate papers are generally organised by townland. A group of townlands makes up a parish, and a townland is the smallest geographical unit that we have in Ireland. They vary in size from under an acre to several thousand acres, but on average they're about 200-300 acres. And one of the main objectives in Irish family history research is to identify the townland your family lived on, because so many of our records are organised by that unit. In this rental we can see the townland, and then we can see the tenant's name and the rent they were paying. Leases can sometimes include genealogical information, which makes them one of the most valuable types of records we find within landed estate papers. A lease is a land agreement between a tenant and a landlord. Usually 2 copies of the lease were signed. One was signed by the landlord, kept by the tenant. The other was signed by the tenant and kept by the landlord. It's usually that copy that has made its way into the public archives. But in some cases, the family themselves may hold the original lease in their own family collection, as we'll see in the next slide. Within a lease, you will find the name of the leaseor and the leasee, the townland that the property is in, sometimes a specific location within the townland, and using maps such as the Griffiths valuation map, sometimes you're able to actually identify where the farm was. The rent to be paid, any conditions that had to be met, sometimes tenants had to plant a certain number of trees, and then the tenure of the lease, how long the lease was to last for. Now, landlords could choose how long that was. 21 years, 31 years was quite common, although there were some landlords who gave leases just for a year. And that means that puts the tenants in a very vulnerable position, because when a lease expires, the tenant has to negotiate with the landlord or the landlord's representative, the land agent, for a new lease. Usually the rent is put up at that time, and it may be that the landlord has decided not to give out another lease. Maybe he wants to amalgamate some small farms for a more efficient way of farming. So there is a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry around the period when a lease expires. Now in Ireland we also have some landlords that gave out what was called a life lease, sometimes a 3-life lease. And instead of this being for a certain number of years, it was for as long as the names listed on the lease, those individuals were alive. So while some people chose the royal family, not that they knew them, but they thought they would have access to better healthcare and would live longer, many others chose their young children, if they had any, or young nieces, nephews, other family relatives, maybe a neighbour's children. Because if those children lived till they were in their 60s, that gives the family security on that land for 2-3 times longer than a typical lease. Now, as if someone died who was named on a lease, the tenant could pay a renewal fine and insert a new name, but for many tenants, the amount of the fine was beyond them, and they just had to wait for each of the individuals to die. The great thing about this is, quite often, as well as the names and the relationship to the tenant listed on the lease, the ages of the individuals are recorded, which gives you an approximate year of birth, really helpful in those areas where the church records, the church baptismal records, don't survive far enough. Occasionally you also get the year of death from the date that the lease expires. This is an example of a lease from the Rolston family, made between the Marquis of Abercorn and the tenant Robert Rolston, and this is the copy that was kept within the family's archive. Now, not all estates kept lease books. It tended to be the larger estates that had many hundreds of tenants. And these are fantastic resources because they're summaries of the information found in a lease. But because they're summaries, they're much quicker to look through rather than having to search individual leases that you get in a box or a bundle. And that's the exact reason why they were made. For the land agent or the landlord who was managing the estate, if they had to check something, rather than have to go through a whole pile of leases, open them all up, search a very wordy document for the actual information, all the key information is extracted in a table, and it's much easier to look through. Sometimes these lease books will contain information on earlier leases as well. We can see that in this particular example from the Kilwallen estate, which was part of the larger Downshire estate. Again, organised by Townland. And then we have the tenants' names, we have the acreage of land, we have the how the farm was held, whether it was a life lease, whether it was at will. And then we have the date that the lease was commenced. So even though this lease book dates from the early 1800s, it mentions leases taken out in November 1756, 1775, 1773. Now perhaps those leases exist, but it is possible that they haven't survived, but yet the information is found within this later lease book. And that's something we would always recommend in research. Don't discount records that post-date your ancestors' immigration, because they may well contain information from earlier documents that have not survived. Then we have the yearly rent and the names listed as lives on the lease. You can see here John Morrison, Anne Smith, aged 11, Jeremiah Smith, aged 12. And on the back of this lease book, the land agent has kept very detailed notes on the status of all those individuals, because the land agent had to be aware of when the lives had all expired and the lives were no longer in existence and the lease had therefore expired. So you can see, for example, he's recorded John Morrison has died in 1787. Anne Smith, now the wife of John Walker, late of Drumlock, went to America in 1801. So we have Anne Smith's married name. She was a child when the lease was originally made. We know that who she married, where the townland they lived in, and the year they emigrated to America. And quite a few people from this townland emigrated to America, so it must have been quite hard for the land agent to keep track of who was alive and who was dead. They didn't need to be residing on the island for the lease still to be valid, they just had to be still alive. And we see that here at number 14. Robert Mitchell dead, Jacob and Jeremiah Smith in America, the latter heard from lately. Well, I'm quite sure that the tenant is telling the land agent that they got a letter from him just the other day to prove he's still alive and to prove that the lease is still valid. One of my favourite kinds of estate papers are the maps. Now, not every landlord had the money or the inclination to pay cartographers to map their estate all the time. Some people only did it once or twice. Other landlords map their estate fairly often. Sometimes it's a huge map that covers the outline of the estate, which is interesting but not as useful for us as genealogists. Sometimes it's a tiny scrap of paper with a little box with the tenant's name in it showing the farm, but no context as to where it was in the landscape. What you really want is something like this beautiful map from 1722 from the Cunningham estate, the outline of the townland here, and then we see that the cartographer has marked the individual farms, the acreage, and most importantly the tenants' names. So if one of these was your ancestor, you'd be able to see exactly where they were farming, and you can see the cartographer has also drawn the houses, and he seems to have tried to draw them in the specific locations that the house was actually built. So you could compare this to a modern map and get a real sense of the farm and even the location of the house that your family lived in 300 years ago. Now, like I said at the start, there's lots of other kinds of records within estate collections. I'm just showing you the most common ones. One of the problems with estate papers is that a lot of our ancestors, rather than being direct tenants renting directly from the landlord, they were maybe courtiers or people who were just renting a house from the tenant. And in that case, that would have been an informal arrangement and there wouldn't be any paperwork. Because they're not renting directly from the landlord, they therefore don't appear in any of the landlord's paperwork. And these courtiers, sometimes it's because they're farm labourers themselves, sometimes it's because they have an occupation that means they don't need to farm. We can see just down here at the bottom, plasterer, gardener. A lot of these ones fall through the cracks. Like I say, they don't appear in paperwork, but some landlords, some estate papers do contain information on them. So for example, the Shirley estate, County Monaghan, had an actual registry of courtiers organised again by Townland. We have the names of the tenants, and these are the individuals who are going to appear in rentals, leases, maps, but we also have the names of the courtiers recorded here who were just renting a house from the tenants. The Shirley estate also has a really interesting loan book from the same period where the landlord was giving out cash loans to his tenants for different reasons, sometimes for buying a horse, sometimes to travel to Britain for the harvest, to work there, and then once they came back home they would pay the loan back. So lots of other kinds of records found within estate papers. Now, first of all, how do we find out what estate our ancestors lived on? One of the main sources for this is Griffiths valuation, which dates from the mid-1850s. And this is useful regardless of when your ancestors were actually living in Ireland, because quite often the same landed family owned the land for many generations or centuries. So we can see if we run our eye down this townland, the main landlord is the Marquis of Waterford, and it could well be that that family owned this land for many centuries. So this is a really good way to start, regardless of the time period you're researching. That's available on the free website askaboutisland.ie, and I have another session on valuation records if you want to find out more about this source. The National Archives of Ireland have been digitising their earlier valuation books, and some of those will also contain the name of the landlord. And then the freeholder registers, these are registers of people who were eligible to vote in the elections, and these date from the late 1700s, and the ones for the north of Ireland have been digitised on the website of the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, and they typically include the name of the landlord. Again, that's a searchable free database. If you're looking in the pre-1800 period, I would highly recommend this book by our research director, Dr. William Rolston. and he focuses solely on the 1600 to 1800 period because pre-1800 records can be more challenging to search. There are less of them online, and some of the main sources we use for research in the 1800s, early 1900s are not available for the earlier period. So he focuses on the other kinds of records that are available, maybe lesser known records, how you can access them, how to interpret them. And he has also created a list of all the pre-1800 surviving estate papers, organised by parish, and what archive they're held in, the archival reference number, and a description of what kind of records they are. So it's a real shortcut in your research. He's done a lot of the preparation work for you. So if this is the period you're looking for and it's in the northern province of Ulster, I'd highly recommend this book. You can buy that on our online bookstore, booksireland.org.uk. Now, if you're looking for the provinces of Connacht and Munster, this is a great free resource that lists some of the records that are available, organised by estate name or family name or house name. The main collections of estate papers in Ireland are the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland in Belfast, the National Library of Ireland, which as well as being a library is an archive with original manuscripts, and the National Archives of Ireland, both in Dublin. Proney holds the best collection of estate papers and the best catalogued. Now, although Proney's legal remit as a National Archive is the 6 counties that make up Northern Ireland, it also has excellent records for the 3 border counties of Cavan, Monaghan and Donegal, and it has records further south. So don't discount Proney. If you're looking for Southern ancestors, it could still be a valuable archive for you. The great thing about Proney is its electronic catalogue has a vast description of the records it holds. So, for example, D671 is the Downshire Estate Papers. Now, you can't order that out. It's thousands of records, so you need to drill down through the collection until you get to an individual document that you can then look at. So you can see, for example, D671/L or leases /R or rentals /M or maps. And if you click into those, you can drill down through the different layers until you get to the individual item level. So when this goes grey rather than blue, that means you've drilled down, and these are individual items that you can order out in Proney. Or if you're not in a position to visit Proney, you can commission someone to look at these. Estate papers can be quite a huge collection, and it sometimes can be difficult to get your head around when you're first looking at them. So the archives have begun to write introductions to a lot of these collections. So on the Proney homepage, if you go to your research and then to the significant privately deposited archives, where the archivists have written introductions to a lot of their major estate collections, just listed alphabetically there. They're quite detailed, and they will give you an idea of the kinds of records held and a brief history of the family. This is a 64-page introduction to the Kenmare papers, which are held in Proney. Kenmare estate was actually based mostly in County Kerry, which is in the southwest of Ireland, yet its records have made their way to the northeast of Ireland in Belfast. So again, another example of how, even if you're looking for Southern ancestors, Proney can still be a valuable source. Similarly, the National Archives of Ireland have begun to write introductions to their most important estate collections, as has the National Library of Ireland, and these are all freely available on these individual archives websites. Within the National Library, some of their catalogues, some of those introductions to collections are vast. As you can see here, the Lismore Castle paper catalogue, 874 pages. And actually what it does is it just lists every single item, every single document with a description. So even for those of you who are not in a position to visit Ireland at the minute, you can actually obtain quite a lot of information from these introductions, from these catalogues that have been put online for you. And if you're planning a trip, it means you can do a lot of the preparation before you come. The great thing about the National Library is they've started an exciting development of digitising some of their estate papers. Now, it's only a small amount at the minute, but it's growing. So you can search their own catalogue and click on the digitise section, and it will bring up a list of results. You can see the thumbnails that you can then click into. So this is a rental from 1845, the Earl of Leitrim's estate, and you can just sit at home and look through this digitised rental Similarly, this is a map of an estate in Lochbricklin, County Down, 1804. Again, you can look at that at home. And that shows you just the reverse of what I was saying about Prony. This is the National Library in Dublin, but it has records for County Down. So because Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland have only been in existence for just over 100 years, do be aware that both archives in the north and south can have records relevant for the other part of the island. And it's not just the National Library. Each county in the Republic of Ireland has a county archive, county museum and county library, and each of those have been encouraged to digitise their records. So they have things like local government records, workhouse registers, school registers, but they've also been digitising any landed estate papers they have. Galway County Council's digital archive has these beautiful estate papers from St George of Headford Estate from 1775, showing the rental from that period, and then the accompanying maps, which are absolutely beautiful. You see the townland name there, you see the type of land, bogland for example, and then we have even some houses mapped in this period, and these are free to access and look at through the Galway County Council pages. Now you can see that the vast amount of estate papers are generally still in the archives. If you're not in a position to come to Ireland at the moment, please be aware that the Ulster Historical Foundation has a range of research services, and we would be delighted to look at some of those records for you. So please do check out our website or contact us if you'd like more information on our services. Thank you very much for watching this presentation.